My official record prediction for the 2023 Notre Dame football season is coming up in today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, and welcome to Locked On Irish. Today is Tuesday, August 2nd, and thanks as always for making this your first listen of the day. I'm the host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018 and have been covering college football as a producer ever since. I got my start at ESPN, but I've been with Fox Sports since the fall of 2021, and we have got a big episode on tap for you today. As I said off the top, I'm going to reveal my official record prediction for the 2023 season in this episode, but first, I'm going to go game by game through the entire schedule and give my thoughts on each matchup to make this a full-fledged season preview episode. I already shared some of my player predictions in yesterday's episode with Luke Smith when we did our preseason awards, so if you haven't listened to that one yet, be sure to check it out because we had so much fun doing it. We always do, but this is my official season preview show, and I can't even begin to describe how happy I am to have made it to this point. So I've done 94 episodes as the host of Locked On Irish, this being my 95th, and it's been a running joke that I started doing this podcast at quite literally the worst possible time on the calendar way back at the end of February. And I'll be honest, there were definitely some times doing this in the dog days of summer where I'd wake up and I wouldn't have any idea about what I was going to talk about on the podcast that day. But those days pushed me to be more creative, and honestly, I think that led to some of my favorite episodes that I've done so far. But now we have made it. We have made it to football season, and I'm really grateful for everyone who joined the ride over these last few months because now that the season is officially here, I feel like the show is really hitting its stride, and it's going to be an awesome season of Notre Dame football. And I'll have more information about how I'm going to do the podcast during the season in tomorrow's episode. That's also when I'll do my big preview of the Navy game. But you can stay up to date on every new episode by subscribing to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. But now it's time to take a look at Notre Dame's schedule for the 2023 season, and it begins in Dublin, Ireland this Saturday against the Navy midshipmen. And I won't go too long in this because, like I just said, I'm going to spend tomorrow's episode breaking down the game. But here's what you need to know for this one. Notre Dame is currently favored by 20.5 on FanDuel. Not too surprising given where both programs are at and considering the fact that Navy has a new head coach for the first time since 2007. Ken Niumatalolo has left the program, and the midshipmen promoted defensive coordinator Brian Newberry after the midshipmen went 4-8 last season. You might recall Newberry's defense gave the Notre Dame offense quite a bit of fits in the second half of last season's game when they pulled a Remember the Titans and decided they were going to blitz all night, and blitz they did, and Drew Pine and the Notre Dame offense completely buckled, and it made for maybe one of the most uninspiring halves of football in the history of Notre Dame football, which feels like there were about 3 or 4 of those last season. So I thank God we're putting that one behind us, and we should have a much more exciting offense to watch this season. But Navy also hired a new offensive coordinator, Grant Chestnut. They have 2 quarterbacks right now. It looks like they're going to play both of them in this game. But really, outside of the difference in size and talent that Notre Dame has every year going up against Navy, they actually have a few more things going for them in this game compared to usual. The fact that it's a season opener is huge. Marcus Freeman said as much in his press conference on Monday that it's much better to play Navy in the season opener because they have more time to prepare. And that makes total sense. They're not trying to force in a game plan for a gimmick offense in the middle of the season. And usually it takes Navy a few games to get things rolling. Lately, they have been god-awful in their season openers. They lost to Delaware, an FCS school, last year, 14-7 in their season opener. And then they got smacked by Marshall, 49-7 in the season opener the year before that. Unfortunately, we can't even make fun of that because Notre Dame also lost to Marshall. That loss will continue to haunt us until our dying days, not to be dramatic. And then in 2020, Navy also lost 55-3 to BYU in the season opener. So they don't normally come out clicking on all cylinders, to say the least. But with that being said, do I expect Notre Dame to come out clicking on all cylinders? Not necessarily. Rarely does Notre Dame ever come out and smoke the team from the jump in the season opener, with a few exceptions, Texas being one example. But in order for Navy to come close to beating this team, they're going to have to come out clicking from the very opening kickoff, and I just find that extremely hard to believe that they'd be able to do that for 60 minutes. I also think that Notre Dame is much more prepared for that all-out blitz than they were last season. They have a much better quarterback, and the team is a little bit more prepared for it. So I think Notre Dame wins. I think they do cover. It might not be the prettiest game of all time, but this game will never be in doubt. Now we get to Tennessee State, the home opener. What gets the juices going quite like an FCS team coming to town to kick off the home slate? Nothing. I'm kidding, obviously. But I'm sure Jason Garrett's riveting commentary will make this a truly unparalleled, thrilling experience from start to finish. But look, as soon as the Navy game ends, we just got to get this game over with, too. If the two coaches in this game, if you gave Eddie George and Marcus Freeman the opportunity to do like a fantasy draft, compiling a roster using only these two teams, I'm genuinely curious how long it would take before they would draft a single player from Tennessee State. Like, this should never be close. I understand the jet lag. I understand that they're going to be staying the night in Dublin on Saturday, and then they will fly back to South Bend on Sunday. Yeah, it's going to be a weird week coming off of that. But look, this is Tennessee State. This team was dead last in their conference last year in sacks allowed. They gave up 38 in 11 games. They should not be able to move the ball whatsoever against Notre Dame, even if that offense is a little bit sluggish early on. There's just not enough guys on Tennessee State to make this even somewhat compelling. I think Notre Dame is going to win by a ton. Hopefully, they're able to just get in, dominate early, and then basically play the backups all second half. The one thing that I'd really like to see in this one would be Steve Angeli actually out there running the offense, not just handing the ball off every play. And I understand that he'd be going up against an FCS school, but still, it'd be really encouraging to see him go up against live competition on Saturday in Notre Dame Stadium and see what he's got. Because he could be the starting quarterback for Notre Dame next year, but I expect that one to be a blowout win by Notre Dame. I probably already spent too much time on this. All right, moving on. Next up, Notre Dame heads to Raleigh, North Carolina to take on the NC State Wolfpack. It is Notre Dame's first Power 5 matchup and their first true road game of the season, all happening at once. And this is going to be the Irish's first true measuring stick before they face off against Ohio State just a couple weeks later. And look, NC State was pretty good last season. They went 8-4, and now they bring in Brennan Armstrong, the grad transfer quarterback from Virginia. Armstrong was exceptional in 2021. He threw for 31 touchdowns, nearly 4,500 passing yards, and he had 9 rushing touchdowns as well. He was sort of a trendy dark horse Heisman pick, I think, at one point that season. And then going into that game against Notre Dame, when people still expected him to be healthy, some people were picking Virginia. He ended up not playing that game because he was hurt, and then Notre Dame dominated that game, especially defensively. They got after the quarterback. I can't remember their backup's name, but they dominated him all night. So this is going to be Notre Dame's first real crack at going up against Brennan Armstrong. But look, his game fell off a cliff in 2022 under their new head coach, Tony Elliott, who was the former Clemson offensive coordinator. He threw for just 7 touchdowns and 12 interceptions on the year, and he was god-awful. But in fairness to him, I think his offensive line consisted of a couple Boy Scouts, a security guard, and some hammered Sigma Chi's they pulled out of the stands. I think that played a major role in his decline. But still, you can't be that bad and just forget about it and think he's going to pick up right where he left off now that he's at NC State. Like, that is truly a stain that I'm not sure you can wipe off or ever come back from. But NC State is certainly hoping that he will. And I also understand that he is reuniting with his old offensive coordinator, the one who he had a lot of success playing for in 2021. But he's probably going to have to carry this NC State offense in 2023. They were 12th in the ACC last season in yards per carry with just 3.3 yards per rush attempt, and they lost their best interior offensive lineman. They also lost 3 of their top 4 receivers from last season. They do bring back both their starting tackles. They're really solid at protecting the quarterback these past 2 seasons, although their quarterback, Devin Leary, did end up tearing his pectoral muscle, and he was out for the season. But overall, they did have a pretty decent offensive line, and they were very good on defense last year, but also ranked 104th in terms of returning production on defense. The guys they do bring back, though, are very talented. Cornerback Aiden White and linebacker Peyton Wilson could be all ACC this season. And I kind of look at this game as a weird wild card for Notre Dame. I wouldn't be surprised if the Irish struggled offensively a little bit in this matchup because the offensive line is going to need a few games to gel. I don't really expect a ton of problems against Navy, maybe some because they're breaking in Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, who, by the way, are officially the starters. The depth chart came out on Monday. Usually I think the depth chart that Notre Dame puts out is kind of pointless, but that was interesting. That is now official. It's something that we've talked about for weeks on this podcast. So maybe they have some problems going up against Navy and their all-out blitz, but this game will be their first real test. I wouldn't be surprised if they struggled a little bit, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Notre Dame just blew the doors off this team because they are much better than them on paper. If NC State is going to win this game, they need an absolutely massive game from Brennan Armstrong, and I just don't really believe that he's going to return to his form from 2 seasons ago in their second game of the season, going up against what we believe is going to be a really good Notre Dame defense. I will be more curious to see how the offensive line does for Notre Dame than anything else in this game, but I think it's going to be a great test and a good opportunity for Notre Dame to really see where they're at before Ohio State comes to town in a couple of weeks. But before that happens, Notre Dame has a home game against Central Michigan. Some people are wondering, could this be a repeat of Marshall, Toledo, Ball State, Vanderbilt? All I got to say is it better not be, because this team stinks. All right, they're terrible. The only recognizable name in this program is the head coach, Jim McElwain. He's the former Florida head coach who, if you don't remember, was once accused of lying butt naked on a shark back in the summer of 2017. If you don't remember this story, basically this picture surfaced of a guy who was actually laying butt naked on a dead shark on a boat, and someone replied, "Hey, I think that's Jim McElwain of Florida," and that picked up a bunch of traction. There was a ton of memes about it, and the guy really did look like him, but evidently it was not. He came out and denied it, but he didn't really get a chance to do it soon because it was the summer. He wasn't having a lot of press conferences. So anyway, that's an aside. I don't think it's going to affect this matchup, but then again, you can never rule it out. The Chippewas went 4-8 last year in the MAC. They lose their starting quarterback, running back, who's drafted in the 7th round, their leading receiver, their starting tight end, and both of their guards. Not to mention their best defensive player, defensive end Thomas Incoom, who had 11.5 sacks last season. So they weren't good last year. They should be worse this year. They do bring back almost everyone on their defense from last season, but their defense last year was terrible. They gave up over 28 points per game last season, which ranked 80th nationally. And even though no one from Notre Dame would ever admit it publicly, they should be able to start prepping for Ohio State during the week leading up to this game. If Central Michigan ends up scoring double-digit points, frankly, I will be disappointed. And I'm sure that there's going to be some questions that arise through Notre Dame's first 3 games, and this should be a good opportunity to sort of get those ironed out on the field on Saturday as much as possible before the Buckeyes come to town. So overall, I expect Notre Dame to cruise through their first 4 games for the most part, but coming up next, we will go through the most daunting part of Notre Dame's schedule, a brutal 4-game stretch that starts with number 3 Ohio State and ends with number 6 USC. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes in life we're faced with tough choices and the path forward isn't always clear. Whether you're dealing with decisions around career, relationships, or anything else, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life so you can move forward with confidence and excitement. Therapy can also help you deal with behaviors, stresses, goals, past experiences, and other areas that can promote your recovery. It can also offer an emotional release and a sense of really being heard, understood, and supported. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnCollege today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnCollege. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. If you're watching along on YouTube, please like the video below and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're listening to the pod, please rate, review, and subscribe there as well. All right, it is time to talk about the biggest game on the schedule this season when number 3, Ohio State, comes to South Bend on September 23rd. Right now, Notre Dame is 8.5-point underdogs on FanDuel. I expected that line to be closer to 6.5. I figured Notre Dame would be only a touchdown underdogs. It's a little bit more than that, but given how these matchups have gone in recent years, I'm frankly not that shocked that it's that high. But this is Notre Dame's best chance at beating Ohio State in a really, really long time. Top to bottom, Ohio State has more talent on the roster. And that's after losing a first-round pick at quarterback, left tackle, and wide receiver. Fact of the matter is, Ohio State has recruited at a higher level than Notre Dame for years, and I feel confident that this is the most talented team the Irish are going to face all season. And yet, I still feel good about the Irish in this matchup. Almost too good, I'd say. I feel like a little bit too confident right now. And it's because Notre Dame has a better quarterback than Ohio State right now. When was the last time you could say that? I can't even remember. Ohio State right now, they're actually going to take their quarterback battle into the season. Kyle McCord is still going at it with Devin Brown. I think a lot of people just assumed it'd be Kyle McCord because he's the older one, but Devin Brown is putting up quite a fight, and he could end up being the starting quarterback in this one. I'm not really sure. Kyle McCord was also teammates with their stud, All-American wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr., who's arguably the most talented football player in all of college football. So whoever's the quarterback, they're going to have studs to throw to. They also have Mecca Egbuka, who's probably another top 5 or top 10 wide receiver in college football. They have 2 great running backs, Travion Henderson and Maya Williams, but they have real issues on the offensive line. They have to replace both of their offensive tackles and their starting center. Their offensive line did not look good in spring practice at all, and they had to go out and add a transfer from San Diego State in the summertime to try and help out the offensive line. And Notre Dame is not only going to have to win, they're going to have to dominate the line of scrimmage when the Ohio State offense is on the field to win this matchup because, frankly, I don't see a world where Notre Dame's offensive line dominates Ohio State's defensive line, or really their front seven, because they're just too talented. They have multiple future first-round picks in their front seven, headlined by JT Tuimoloau, who had one of the best games by a defensive player that I've ever seen last year when the Buckeyes came back to beat Penn State. I think he had a few sacks, forced fumble, pick six. He was just incredible. He took over the game as a defensive end. It was insane. And last year, we all saw how the Buckeyes' defensive line really controlled Notre Dame's offensive line all game last year in that season opener. And I think Notre Dame's offensive line, at worst, it needs to be a draw. But then when Notre Dame is on defense, they really, really need to get after Kyle McCord or Devin Brown or whoever's back there at quarterback and make his life hell all game. And looking big picture now, Ohio State has a pretty damn tough schedule this year. They've got to go on the road against Michigan and try to beat their arch rival who's gotten the better of them the past 2 seasons. And that's the game that the entire program, their entire fan base has circled on their calendars. But they also have Penn State, Wisconsin, and, of course, Notre Dame. And whoever is starting at quarterback for Ohio State is going to be playing in their first big game ever in their college careers in South Bend in prime time. Notre Dame's corners should give them a chance going up against Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka and all the other stud wideouts that they're going to bring in. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Carnell Tate, former top Notre Dame target who ended up picking the Buckeyes, and Brandon Inniss as well. He was the number 1 wide receiver in last year's class. This is not going to be easy. I expect a back-and-forth game throughout, but in the end, I just have this feeling that Notre Dame is going to prevail. I don't know if it's going to be one last drive by Sam Hartman or a big stop by the Notre Dame defense, but a win against Ohio State at home with both teams undefeated likely could be the biggest win of my lifetime. That's saying a lot. I was born in 1996, but I think this win would be bigger than Clemson in 2020. I think it would be bigger than Oklahoma in 2012. It would mean everything to this program, and especially Marcus Freeman, a former Buckeye, to beat them at home, at night, in the biggest game, and really the beginning of the college football season. And I will be there in person for this one, and if it plays out the way I think it will probably go down as a top 5 day in my life if the Irish do end up pulling this one out. Then they have to go to Duke, and really inconvenient timing for that game. So Mike Elko and the Duke Blue Devils went 9-4 last season. His first season as a head coach, he won ACC Coach of the Year. They've got a lot of returning production on offense, led by quarterback Riley Leonard, who threw for nearly 3,000 yards last season, and he also led the team in rushing with 699 yards on the ground. They've got some pretty solid skill players around them. They also return their leading receiver and all of their running backs, plus their left tackle, Graham Burton, is a legitimate top NFL draft prospect. So the offense should be solid. On defense, they bring back their defensive tackle, Dwayne Carter, who had 11 TFLs last season, and he's their best defensive player. But when you look at this team and why they were successful last season, a big reason why is because they just created a ton of turnovers. Part of that is luck, though, because they forced 17 fumbles last season, which alone is really impressive. We all know when Mike Elko was the coach at Notre Dame how much causing turnovers was a point of emphasis for that defense, and it showed in that season when he was Notre Dame's defensive coordinator. But then again, Duke's opponents also just had 7 more fumbles on their own, and the Blue Devils managed to recover 16 out of those 24 fumbles. That seems like a lot because recovering a fumble usually just has to do with however it bounces, and yet they were able to rack up a bunch. They were second in the country in total turnovers last season. But talent-wise, Notre Dame is way better than this team. But as we know, it's not always the most talented who win. I do expect this game to be ugly. I think Mike Elko and the Blue Devils are going to be really amped for this one, and Notre Dame is probably going to be coming off a massive, massive win. And last season, Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame did not really handle success all that well. So this is going to be a real test of that, assuming Notre Dame does beat Ohio State. And as long as Notre Dame wins the turnover battle in this one, I think they're almost certainly going to win this game because they are more talented. They match up fine. But if they don't, and there's a chance that they don't, this game could get dicey. But in the end, I do expect the Irish to pull this one away, lean on Wojciak Esme, win by like 10. Then the Irish head down Interstate 65 to go play at Louisville against the Cardinals. And this one hits close to home. I'm incredibly nervous about this game. Given the fact that I'm from Louisville, I have a ton of friends who are big Louisville fans, and I know that if Notre Dame does get upset by the Cardinals, I will never, ever hear the end of it. But I want to make this clear. This is going to be a really, really tough game for the Irish because Jeff Brom, the new Cardinals head coach, is a hometown hero. Really. Like the Brom family in Louisville, they're royalty. Not only Jeff Brom, but Brian Brom, the former quarterback during maybe one of the best seasons in Louisville football history. They're all back, and this has been in the making for years. Jeff Brom almost went back a few years ago, but he saw how chaotic and just completely broken the program was after the second Bobby Petrino era, so he waited. Now that the program is in a little bit better shape, he came back, but he still completely overhauled the roster. He brought in 40 new players to the program, so if you look back and look at what Louisville did last year and try to compare it to what they could be this year, it really doesn't make a ton of sense. They brought in Jack Plummer, the quarterback who played for Cal last season, Purdue the year before that, under Jeff Brom. So it's a familiar face for Notre Dame. They've already beaten them twice, and they'll get their third shot this season. They also have Brady Allen, who's a quarterback from Purdue that Jeff Brom brought over as well. And even though Plummer isn't the most talented quarterback in the world, they're going to air it out. Jeff Brom likes the air raid, or his version of the air raid, and he's got some good receivers to throw to as well. They brought in some productive transfers, and their running back, Jawar Jordan, ran for 5.74 yards per carry last season. And what makes me so nervous about this game is the stadium is going to be absolutely rocking. It's not the biggest stadium in the world, but I've been there, and it can get loud. And another main part in all this is that Louisville is going to have a cakewalk to start the season. I fully expect them to be undefeated, or at most they'll have one loss. They'll likely be ranked going into this matchup. So even though we're not all thinking about this game as a big-time, prime-time matchup, I think it will be. And really, this is the first time Louisville football and their fan base have had a chance to get up for a game of this magnitude in a really long time. And those people are going to get after it. These people in Louisville, man, they've got like an IV drip of bourbon. So they're going to be ready to go. They're going to be ready to get rowdy. And it's going to be a really, really tough game for Notre Dame. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a shootout. But I think even if Louisville gives Notre Dame everything they can handle, Notre Dame should have Audric Estime and a big offensive line in front of him to sort of lean on at the end of the game and try to overpower the Cardinal, because, again, even though they're going to be up for this one, Notre Dame is more talented and they're deeper, and I think that is why Notre Dame is going to prevail in the end. So give me the Irish in a close win against the Louisville Cardinal. And then the week after that, it really doesn't get a whole lot easier for the Irish now, does it? Because they got to host arch rival, number 6th ranked USC, in what would be their 8th straight game without a bye. Right now, Notre Dame is 1.5-point underdogs on FanDuel. And personally, this is the scariest game on the schedule to me, because Caleb Williams is the best player Notre Dame has had to deal with since Trevor Lawrence when he was at Clemson. And nothing, and I mean truly nothing, would make me more upset, irate, nauseous, just truly. I couldn't even put into words the emotions I would feel watching Caleb Williams dance around Notre Dame Stadium if they were to win that game. I can't, just the image alone makes me so mad. We cannot allow that to happen, and Notre Dame is going to have to play a really, really good game in order to knock off the Trojans in this one, because they're going to be better than they were last year. Their offensive line is going to be decent. They don't have to be great, though, because they have Caleb Williams behind him, and he's like Houdini back there. He can run around, and he is so difficult to bring down. So their offensive line just needs to be serviceable. I think they will be maybe that plus more, because they brought in some good transfers in the portal. And then defense is obviously the big question mark here. Alex Grinch, the USC defensive coordinator, and their defense was really, really bad last season. Other than that game against Notre Dame when they somehow stopped Notre Dame's rushing attack, that was frankly embarrassing. But they lost their best cornerback, Mekhi Blackman, and their best defensive lineman in Tuipulotu. But they did add Anthony Lucas from Texas A&M, former 5-star recruit that Notre Dame was going after, and Bear Alexander from Georgia, 2 elite recruits with a ton of potential. I think Alexander had 2 sacks last year in the college football playoff, so he's actually a little bit more proven than Anthony Lucas. And I think their defense is going to be better in terms of talent, but I think they're going to come back to earth a little bit with the turnovers. I've already talked about what Duke did in the turnover margin. USC led the country in it last year with 22. Duke was second with 6, so a 6 turnover difference between first and second is quite a lot. Some of that is coaching. I understand that Alex Grinch really makes causing turnovers a priority, mostly because the defenses he's had have been really bad, and the only way to keep them in games is by causing turnovers. But sometimes it comes back to bite them. Like last year when Utah was beating USC for the second time in the Pac-12 championship game, it was the worst display of tackling I've ever seen from USC. It was embarrassing. And I know that the players were like, oh, they were trying to cause fumbles. They were trying to force the action. No, they were terrible at tackling. And they let that game slip away because of just horrid defense. And then they lost to Tulane in the Cotton Bowl because they couldn't stop Michael Pratt and the Green Wave over there. So the defense should be bad. And Notre Dame is going to have a good offense to go, I think, toe-to-toe with this USC offense. So it's going to be a shootout. You're not going to stifle Caleb Williams for 4 quarters. It's not possible. You can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. But the Irish have a more talented roster, and I think that is going to be why Notre Dame does end up prevailing, because the thing is, USC's starting lineup is much improved, but they still lack a lot of depth behind them, considering this is Lincoln Riley's second year, and they've had to add a lot of guys via the transfer portal. When you add guys via the portal, they don't really want to be backups. They want to start. So they've filled in some gaps in the starting lineup, but behind them, depth is a real concern at multiple positions for the Trojans. So at this point in the season, teams are going to start to deal with injuries and things like that, and I think that could have a big impact on this game. Notre Dame is a much deeper team than USC, I would say by far. But like I said, this is going to be a shootout. I'm already dreading this game, honestly, because I'm going to be so nervous. It's going to be so back and forth. It's just going to be a lot to deal with as a fan, especially knowing what could happen if Notre Dame loses. But in the end, I think the Irish offense gets the ball last. They go down the field, they win the game, and we all get to celebrate, or we all could just be relieved and let out a collective sigh of relief when the Irish manage to beat the Trojans and they head into the bye week 8-0. So that's where I've got the Irish, 8-0. But can they close out the last third of the season by going undefeated? That's coming up right after this. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the best chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Okay, we've got 4 games left to go here, and Notre Dame will be coming off a bye when they host Pittsburgh at home on October 28th. And honestly, I would love to know if this game was part of the recruiting pitch by Pittsburgh head coach Pat Narduzzi when he was trying to get Phil Dracovic to come to Pitt. Honestly, I think it was, because we all know how Pat Narduzzi feels about Notre Dame. He has not been shy about his opinions toward the football program and the university, and he's probably got a lot of pent-up anger considering the fact that he hasn't beaten Notre Dame once since he was a defensive coordinator at Michigan State way back in 2010. It has been that long since he's been able to get the better of the Irish on the field. We know Phil Dracovic made his feelings known last season with one of the most cringeworthy Instagram posts of all time. He has still yet to accept a single amount of responsibility for how things transpired when he was at Notre Dame. It makes me irate when people say that Phil Dracovic was a better quarterback than Ian Book. That was not true then. It is not true now. And Ian Book proved that it wasn't true on the field against Boston College in that matchup in 2020. And then Phil Dracovic has gone on to prove that was true with the way that his career has panned out in the time since. I'm glad we got that settled. Anyone who still thinks otherwise, I'm sorry. I don't want to listen to a single opinion of yours about college football ever again, because Ian Book was better than Phil Dracovic. Anyway, rant over. Pitt went 9-4 last season. They also lost their quarterback, they lost their running back, they lost their wide receiver, they lost their best pass rushers, and their 4 leading tacklers. Yes, they added Dracovic and a couple other guys in the portal, but nobody that's really going to scare you. They're 119th in the country in returning production, so they should take a big step back this year. And will they make this game competitive to start? Probably. Maybe that lingers into the second half because they are really going to want this one. And I understand the history. I understand that Notre Dame has struggled against Pitt in the past, but Notre Dame is going to be coming off a bye. I feel like they're not going to overlook this game. They're going to know what's at stake in this one. They're going to know that Phil Dracovic was a former Notre Dame player. I don't know if people on the team have any ill will or any bad feelings towards him. They probably don't, because he was their teammate. But I think they're going to be ready for this one, understanding that the other side really, really wants this one. So this is going to be a big test for Notre Dame to step up and just beat an inferior team, because that's what Pitt is. They're an inferior team, and Notre Dame should be able to handle this one throughout. I understand the pass, but I think Notre Dame is going to dominate this one, kind of like they did way back in 2020 in that COVID year when they actually went to Pitt and smacked them. But then we get to Clemson, November 4th, and what will be one of the best weekends of the season in college football. Notre Dame will head to Clemson. They're currently ranked 9th in the AP poll, and Notre Dame is 6.5-point underdogs on FanDuel. I know that there's some people out there who are going to see that line and think it's ridiculous given what Notre Dame did to the Clemson Tigers last season with a worse team and Drew Pine at quarterback, and I think that's fair. But to be honest, I think we can all agree that that Clemson team wasn't that great for their standards. And they're going to be much better at quarterback this year with Cade Klubnik around, former 5-star prospect, and they're going to have a much better play caller with Garrett Riley, the brother of Lincoln Riley. Garrett Riley turned Max Duggan, the TCU backup quarterback, into a Heisman Trophy finalist last season. Now he's at a team with much better talent than what he had last year at TCU, and he's got a much better defense to help him out. I realize that Clemson has lost some of their best guys in the front seven, including Miles Murphy and Brian Brissett, but they recruit so well that I don't really expect a major drop-off there for the Clemson front seven. And I really have high expectations for what this team can accomplish overall. A lot of people have written them off, and I think it's going to come back to bite them because Dabo Swinney is still a great head coach. Yes, he does some puzzling things. His approach to the transfer portal it's not really practical in modern college football, but there is a reason that they were at the top of college football for as long as they were. There was a point when we were talking about Clemson, like, are they the next Bama? Now, Georgia is the next Bama. They've sort of solidified that spot. Clemson has certainly taken a step back. But when they have a really good quarterback, they are going to be really good. When they had Deshaun Watson, they went to the national championship. When they had Trevor Lawrence, they went to the national championship. I'm not saying Cade Klubnik is going to be as good as those guys, but I think that he has a really high ceiling and that this season he's going to really elevate that Clemson offense. And I just think at this point in the season, this is going to be a really tough matchup for Notre Dame to win. It is so hard to win at Clemson. I think they have like one loss at home in the past decade plus or something like that. So their team is loaded with talent. They have an excellent coach, and I do expect them to defeat the Irish in this one. And I will be honest, this is another game that I think is going to be awesome. I think it's going to go down the wire. And even though Notre Dame will likely have been in a lot of close games up to this point, I just think the ball bounces the wrong way in this one, and they end up losing a tight game on the road going into another bye week late in the season, which is sort of weird. But they go into the bye. Coming out of that, they play Wake Forest at home. It's senior day. It is Sam Hartman day, and this is probably going to be an emotional roller coaster for the Notre Dame starting quarterback. And that's honestly the only reason why I could see this game being close, because not only did Wake Forest lose Sam Hartman, they lost their best wide receiver in A.T. Perry to the NFL draft, and they have to replace 3 starters on the offensive line. There was a reason that Sam Hartman thought it'd be best to leave the program, especially to improve his NFL draft stock. That is a big reason why he's at Notre Dame right now. So Wake Forest is near the bottom in returning production, and they aren't a team that can really go in the transfer portal and grab a bunch of guys to fill those gaps. But Dave Clawson, their head coach, he's a really, really good head coach. And we saw how the Irish defense struggled with Stanford's version of the slow mesh last season. They're going to see a much better version of that against Wake Forest from the mastermind, the architect of it all in Dave Clawson. But in the end, Notre Dame is a much, much more talented team than Wake Forest. But given that this game is in November, weather could be a factor, emotions at play with it being senior day. Maybe this is close until the second half, but I do expect the Irish to run away with this one, coming off a tough loss to Clemson. Then we get to the final game of the regular season. The Irish head to Palo Alto to play Stanford, and this is a revenge game, as sad as that may be. The fact that this is a revenge game pisses me off, but alas, Notre Dame suffered one of the most embarrassing losses of my lifetime last year when they lost to Stanford at home. Had the Cleveland Guardians not pulled off a miraculous comeback in the 9th inning to defeat the Yankees in the ALDS, I don't know if I would be here talking with you today because I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, there for work with Fox last season. And when I was finally done with work for the day, I went to a Buffalo Wild Wings and watched the Stanford game on one TV, and then I had the Guardians-Yankees game on another TV, and I was sitting by myself at the bar so I could watch both these games happening at once, and both games were not going well at all, and I was so mad when Notre Dame lost to Stanford. But then Guardians came back. I was like, all right, I got a little something. I'm actually going to be able to sleep tonight. Then I woke up the next day, and then I remembered, wait, Notre Dame did actually just lose to Stanford at home at night, and I was still sick to my stomach. And then the Guardians ended up losing the LDS. Another rant, probably getting too far off topic here. But somehow, the Stanford Cardinal did have 5 guys get drafted after going 3-9 last season, so they're probably going to be even worse. They got a new head coach, Troy Taylor. People around the program seem to be pretty high on him, but he's got a long rebuild ahead of him. I'd equate it to something like what Micah Shrewsbury is dealing with in the Notre Dame basketball team, where he's just got a really long way to go. The future might be bright. It's probably going to take some time. This game should never be close. Let's be clear about that. If it is, that's embarrassing. The only good returning player Stanford has is the tight end, Ben Urasek. Other than that, Notre Dame should dominate at every level. They should remember what happened last year, get their foot on the gas early, and never take it off. They should beat the brakes off this team because, what happened last year was so sickening. I think this game will be somewhat similar to that 2021 game when Notre Dame just cruised start to end, and that's how the regular season should end. It should end much like it did in 2021. Notre Dame should be 11-1 when season ends. That's what I've got the Irish going this year. I've got the lone loss coming on the road to a really good Clemson team. And I'll be honest. That one loss could go against Clemson. It could happen against USC. I could see it even happening against Louisville. I could see it happening against Ohio State. But I really think it's only going to be one loss. And the loss that would make the most sense to me is on the road against a Clemson team who was also out looking for revenge after what happened last season. I can't say for certain that 11-1 is going to be good enough to make the college football playoff because Notre Dame is going to have a great resume if that is the case. But they've never made the playoff with one loss. If Clemson is undefeated, does that hurt them? I don't know. I'm not going to predict future college football playoff questions, but I think Notre Dame is going to be in it at the very end, and that's really all you can ask for. And I understand that some people are going to think that I'm just being a homer, that this is a reach. Notre Dame is coming off an 8-4 season. This schedule is admittedly very daunting, and Notre Dame did lose 2 games last season that they absolutely should not have lost. But sometimes good teams catch breaks. And to be honest with you, it doesn't matter how good you are. Every good team is going to need some breaks to get where they want to go. Look at last year. Georgia was like unstoppable, and they almost lost to Missouri on the road. And every single season that Notre Dame went undefeated in my lifetime, they've had some scares, and they've had to pull one out late. And I think that's going to happen again this year. They're going to be in tight games against Louisville, Duke, Ohio State, USC, Clemson, maybe even NC State. But when you have a quarterback like Sam Hartman, who's not only extremely talented, but one of the most experienced players in all of college football, I feel like that is the difference maker, and that wins out in those tight moments far more often than not. This team is going to be battle tested, and I expect at least 3 to 4 near heart attacks this season, maybe more. There's going to be times where this team has their backs against the wall. They're going to have to come from behind. They're going to have to beat a team or two that might have more talent than them. But I'm telling you, man, there's something about this team that has me feeling really good about what they can accomplish. I felt this way in 2020. I felt this way in 2018, especially after that Stanford game. And I'll leave you with this. Whenever Notre Dame has their best seasons, it's usually when the people on the outside don't expect it. In 2020, Notre Dame was ranked 11th in the preseason AP poll. They went undefeated that regular season. The Irish were ranked 12th at the start of 2018, undefeated regular season. They were unranked in 2012. Those were the 3 most successful Notre Dame teams in my lifetime, and not once were they ranked in the top 10 in the preseason. This year, they come in at 13th. This is all the ingredients of a truly special season for Notre Dame, and I can't tell you how excited I am to watch it unfold and talk with you about it every step of the way. All right, let's end it on that note. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnIrish, on Instagram at LockedOnIrishPod, and my personal Twitter account at Tyler, WOJCIAK. Same time, same place tomorrow for my preview of the Navy game. I'll see you then.